I am currently the only male in my entire office unit. At first, I did not think much of it, but over time, I started to notice how the energy around me shifted the way I show up. I pay more attention to how I speak, dress, and carry myself. I am learning a lot just by observing how my coworkers handle conflict, build community, and keep each other accountable in subtle ways. It has also made me realize how different work culture can feel depending on who you are surrounded by. I am more in tune with emotional dynamics and communication styles, and honestly, it is making me better both professionally and personally. I am curious if anyone else has had a similar experience. What did you learn? Story 1. Working in a hospital, I have quickly learned that the locker room talk people often assume men engage in is actually what some do at work, and they simply project that behavior onto all men. Story 2. I worked at a hospital in Boston with an all-female staff. Every day, I dealt with sexual harassment because I was the only male. Sadly, when I brought it to human resources attention, they tried to fire me to avoid the issue. From my experience, they backstabbed one another all day, undermined each other, and could not keep their emotions in check. This was the worst work experience of my life. Story 3. I taught kindergarten and pre-kindergarten. I was asked to do literal heavy lifting and similar tasks. My administrators also gave me boys who needed a strong male presence, so my class became a dumping ground for behavior problems. I also heard a lot more about urinary tract infections and menstrual cycles than I might have cared to. I just became one of the girls. Story 4. I worked for about 6 months in an all-female team. It was by far the most eye-opening experience, especially coming from an all-male team in my previous job. Every small detail was noticed. The amount of drama behind everything was scandalous, and I had to be careful with my tone of voice, or else I would come across as aggressive entirely by accident. I had to be extremely subdued despite already being a generally subdued person. It didn't help that they were very cliquey and judgmental, but I think that reflected the type of people they were. I ended up getting fired because I stood my ground on a system error, which I was absolutely right about. My manager literally went to the bathroom and cried, and then I was gone by Friday. Story 5. I work for an administration that is all women. They gossip and share their emotional concerns constantly when I am around. I do not want to be rude, so I pretend to listen, which has backfired over the years. Some have come on to me, but I do not pursue relationships at work anymore, not since my 20s. For that reason, it has also backfired, as I have been labeled incorrectly for rejecting their advances. Story 6. No faster way to end your idealization of putting women on a pedestal than to be outnumbered by them in your social or professional circles. You hear and see things that make you quickly realize they are just people like the rest of us. Story 7. It was nice when they liked me. Many people checked in on each other and were kind. Then some staff changed, the culture shifted, and suddenly I was the bad guy. For example, I was the director of my department and was accused of mansplaining when training my entirely new team. When I apologized for not asking if they already knew this information, they said they did not. They also began gathering without inviting me. I respect that some spaces are easier to relax in when it is just one gender, but it did hurt because I put a lot of effort into being kind to them. It was a lot of walking on eggshells because I truly respect women and did not want my team to feel undervalued or demeaned in any way. Eventually, I realized that I could do no right with this particular group, so I moved on. The organization folded shortly after because no one had the skills I wanted to teach them. Turns out they needed that information. They just did not want it from me. Story 8. This was some time ago, but I was the only male in an office of about 8 people. I was in my early 20s and everyone else was over 30. I used to assume we were all one happy team, only to be informed periodically that the women had divided themselves into groups and were in conflict. I was also told that they had collectively insisted on hiring a young male because they wanted someone who would not contribute to that dynamic. Story 9. Yes. It was like being in an office of middle-aged mean girls. One day, I discovered that they had been deliberately tampering with one woman's office equipment and ended up destroying her computer and work phone. When I asked why, they said it was because she was secretly getting drunk at lunch. They said they went to lunch with her every day and never saw her drink, but an hour or two later, she would be stumbling and acting drunk. I checked on the woman the next day around that time, and her breath had a fruity smell, which is a sure sign of uncontrolled diabetes. I called an ambulance, and her blood sugar was off the scale. Turned out she did not know she was diabetic. In a strange way, the mean girls might have saved her life, but there were better ways to do it. Story 10. I was selected for a 4-month consulting project that was an all-female team. The project manager chose me because I have an uncommon name that ends with an A and believed I was a woman. The experience was terrible. I was teased, picked on, and generally asked to do all the menial work. It turned me off consulting in general and that company specifically. When the project ended, during the final team dinner, 2 consultants propositioned me. At that point, I was so angry with the team that I ignored the offers and moved on. Story 11. Dude, nurse here. I have spent a career in female-dominated workplaces. Some units and departments have been more evenly split. My current department is all women, and I often attend leadership meetings where I am the only man present out of about 30 people. How is it? It is fine. It is tolerable. It is normal to me. I have never worked in a male-dominated workplace for comparison. I do wish I had more male colleagues, and I often observe that a group of women can absolutely get away with saying things about the opposite sex that a group of men could not. Story 12. One of 2 males in an office of 6 females, including my manager. I used to be the only male. There is a lot of gossip which causes delays in work. When I am working, I focus on my tasks and do not have time to join in, so I am seen as boring. There is a lot of power play, and there is an expectation that males should be the gentlemen, for example, that men must be the ones to drive when we go to lunch. It is hard to get help from them, and communication about work-related matters is a significant issue. This is a reminder that I am sharing what is happening in my current workplace. Story 13. I am a nurse, a male nurse who is 6 feet 2 inches tall and over 300 pounds. I handle all the difficult tasks. Violent patients, heavy lifting, and general duties that female nurses refuse to do. Sometimes it gets tiring and I want to revolt, but the women are generally very nice and thankful to have a man who can do these tasks on the unit. There are not many male nurses who are not gay, super effeminate, or unwilling to do general male tasks. Sometimes I dislike it, but I understand. Honestly, that was one of the reasons I became a nurse. I am always in demand. I have never had a hard time finding a well-paying job, and being a man, my resume speaks for itself because I can do many things female nurses cannot or will not do. Story 14. I have done it a few times. The first time, I was in a department with people mostly around my age, and we all got along great. It was an awesome experience. The most recent time was a disaster. There was so much tension, gossip, and drama. Story 15. Twice. Once, everyone was super nice, and it was like having 30 moms. The other time, it was just constant negativity. It all depends on the individual office culture. Story 16. I didn't work directly with the 3 women but consistently collaborated with them on paperwork. One day, we were all in the same physical workspace together, and somehow BDSM and sex came up. All 3 started talking about being whipped, whipping, restraints, leather, and related topics. I am many years younger than them, and it did not make me uncomfortable. However, I thought if this were 3 older men and 1 younger woman, they would all be fired before lunch. Story 17. A job I had was mostly with men. We visited banks and worked on all the equipment for banks. Most bank employees were women. Coming from the oil field to this position, I had to completely change my vocabulary and speak in a more professional manner. It was a total culture shock, but it was for the better. It was fun because when I showed up to do a job, the women I worked with would flirt and joke with me, which made it enjoyable. Story 18. I was the only male in a restaurant with about 20 floor staff once. That was wild. They were all young college-aged women. They can get quite competitive. Story 19. For a bit over a month, I was the only male in the wing of the building where I work. There were only 6 offices and maybe a dozen people in that segment, but for a short while, it was me and 9 females. Although we all worked in the same physical location, we did not all work for the same department. I was the sole person for my department, and my first-line supervisor worked in an office on the other side of the state. For the most part, there was no issue or anything out of the ordinary to speak about. There were two women who seemed to think I worked for them and was available for manual labor tasks. However, I don't think it was solely because I was the only male. Seniority and time with the company played a role, along with their not realizing that I did not work for their department. Once, I was taking some empty boxes out of my office to the recycling area. One of the ladies attempted to give me instructions to clear out a bunch of boxes in a common area. Her exact words were, "Why don't you get the boxes in the copier room closet? Break them down and bring them down." She did not like my answer, "Why don't I?" "Because it's not my job." And I kept walking. She tried to make a fuss about it. An hour later, she and her supervisor showed up at my office to ask who I was, what department I worked for, and who my supervisor was. I showed them my identification with my name and department, but indicated that anything else was subject to discretion. If there was a need for them to know, they would be informed through proper channels. They did not like that at all. Story 20. My workplace is 90% women. There is so much drama. I try to only talk to one or two people now. My advice for people working with only the opposite sex is to keep their heads down. Story 21. Right after I left the Marines, I started working at a mental health office. The only other man was a 60-year-old counselor who was often out, so it was just me and about 20 women. I was 25 and in great shape. The job was okay for a while. I was mostly responsible for filling out paperwork. It did not require much talking except with my direct supervisor if I had questions. The women were in and out of my area all day, always finding reasons or paperwork to come by. I thought it was normal until I had lunch with my supervisor. She revealed what was really going on. The women had never entered that area before. They were just finding excuses to talk to me. She was the first to tell me because she was my boss and trusted me. At the time, I was dating someone and was not the cheating type. After that, the women became more aggressive. They would trash talk each other, bring me snacks, and find reasons to touch me, like placing a hand on my shoulder or needing something from the drawer in front of me. They started texting a lot with work excuses and tried to steer conversations into more personal topics. I told my girlfriend about it. She wanted me to quit, and I did because the pay was not worth it. Story 22. My last job was remote, so for the most part, I was able to avoid a lot of the office drama. Many of the women I worked with spoke negatively about each other. Some were a little too flirtatious for my professional liking. However, overall it was fine, except for a few negative comments about men from some unusual women. I suppose I did not realize until the end how unpleasant they were to each other, which I found out over drinks with former colleagues. I think it had less to do with them being women and more to do with a really toxic work culture and toxic people. Story 23. I am doing it right now. I get along with all the women in the office, but they like to gang up on me and pick on me since I am the only man there. Also, it is constantly one complaining about the other, and I feel like they try to get me caught in the middle. I, on the other hand, just listen and say I understand rather than trying to pick sides. Lastly, they can be vocal about checking out the FedEx delivery driver after he leaves. The ones being vocal are married, no less. However, if I were to say anything even remotely like that, I would be told, "You are married." I called them out on it and was told, "Guys would think many women they encounter are attractive, but there is only this one man that we are fawning over, so that is why it is okay." I realize I mostly talked about the negatives. The positives are they are usually more understanding of health issues and family matters that come up. They are also supportive when we call in an order somewhere and include me. They can definitely be more caring than most men I have worked with, which can certainly be a good thing. It is also not every single woman who works there that acts this way, but the ones in my department are the ones I work alongside all day, every day, and they are primarily responsible for the negatives mentioned above. Story 24. I was once, and I honestly ended up leaving for the first opportunity that came up after about a year. The cattiness, the nitpicking, and the taking sides were enough to drive me crazy. Story 25. In college, I was in a situation where I learned that women are comfortable talking to me about their menstrual periods. My then girlfriend, later my wife, and now my ex, insisted that it was actually them flirting with me by discussing their intimate health. I still do not agree with her assessment. Story 26. Yes, I am a male in a female-dominated field. Currently, I work in an office with 4 women and myself. I supervise 3 of the 4 women. The other is the office manager, whose boss is also a female. I agree with the original poster. There are many subtle nuances between female and male communication styles. I am direct with my supervisors, which I think helps. I intentionally try not to get involved with their in-group disagreements, but sometimes it becomes unavoidable. Like everything in life, there are positives and negatives to it. Story 27. I spent a year working for a lingerie and swimwear company. Almost all of the employees at head office were female, and my team was entirely female except for me. It was great. I generally get on well with women, and they were a pretty young, fun team. It wasn't hugely different from other offices I've been in, but there was definitely more focus on supporting each other, and the humor leaned very female, which I liked. There were definitely more open displays of emotion. I saw one lady cry on multiple occasions when describing heartwarming customer journeys. There was also a lot of baking. This was a plus for me, as I discovered a hidden talent for crafting breasts out of fondant and helped our team win multiple cake competitions. They were often bra-related themes. There were many funny moments because I was the only man, and we were dealing with bras all day. So yeah, it was awesome, and I'm still in touch with some of my friends from there. Story 28. I have many more women in my workplace. Let's just say there are more women who are cruel to other women than you realize, and they are more direct and blunt. Also, it is very hard not to notice women since some have attractive figures at my workplace. I have to be very careful. Story 29. I used to work in an office full of women where the amount of gossip was incredible. I also paid very close attention to how I dressed and behaved, wearing nice clothes, cologne, and nice shoes. Story 30. I have been in this situation. It was a small office where everyone was more familiar and more excitable about the challenges of their work than in a bigger office. Certainly, emotions did run high sometimes. This may or may not be a gender issue as much as a small office issue. We may never know for sure. I learned the best thing to do is remain professional, especially in your responses to others. Be patient, gentle, and helpful at all times. Someone may approach you with high-strung emotions at some point. Do not take the bait. Stay calm and let them know you will help them. Whatever you do, do not complain to your manager about anyone unless it is a serious human resources issue. Story 31. When I went to college in Los Angeles, my work-study job was in a departmental office. Not only was I the only male working in the office, I was also the only white person in the office. Our office manager was black, one coworker was black, another coworker was Middle Eastern and North African, another coworker was Filipina, and the remaining 2 coworkers were both Chicana. Our department chair was male, but he was also Middle Eastern and North African. To be honest, I rarely felt marginalized due to my race, but I frequently felt marginalized due to my biological sex. Also, a vast majority of my coworkers were really cool and easy to get along with. It was one of them, Iris, who ruined the workplace for everyone and made it toxic. But she especially targeted me. It was an extremely unpleasant workplace, to put it mildly, largely because of Iris and our office manager, Vangi, who let Iris get away with her behavior. Story 32. I am the only man in my office. It is a female-dominated field. It does not change much in my opinion. I get asked to carry things a bit more, and I have noticed people tend to come to me if they are annoyed at someone else instead of confronting them directly. But overall, it is 99% the same. I do think when people are having a rough day, there is a bit more acceptance of reduced performance at work. Story 33. I am a dentist and work with all women, but I would not advise it. It has taught me to adapt different communication styles, and it probably works well for different personalities. Story 34. I am not the only man in my office, but I am in a group with just one other man. The rest are women. There is nothing technically wrong about this, and the women are very smart and professional. However, the difference in communication styles is clear. I am used to being direct, assertive, and to the point. I look at work matters in a very matter-of-fact way. The women seem to prefer some rapport building first, such as smiles, compliments like, "I like your sweater," verbalizing many details, and figuring things out as they speak. I often get lost and do not understand the issue or what they need from me until much later. Especially if they are relatively young, though highly skilled, some do not want to seem bossy, so they often hedge their statements with phrases like, "I am not an expert at this, but correct me if I am wrong, but," or either "this is difficult or maybe I am just not understanding." They are obviously not lacking in ability, but sometimes they prioritize expressing how they feel about the problem, seeking reassurance or rapport before addressing the actual issue. The only challenge for me is when there is baby talking or cutesiness, which some of them use. In some technical fields, such as mechanical or aerospace engineering, that style does not work very well. Story 35. I was overwhelmed. It was brutal. It felt like I had 15 mother figures all demanding I do different things. Then each would scold me for doing what the others said I must do. There was no winning for me. Story 36. I worked in an office that was mostly women for around 12 years. Those who are kind are very kind. Those who have a malicious streak in them are the worst. I generally have a positive view of people. Los Angeles and computer science are the worst. Most of the others are amazing professionals. Story 37. I worked in a call center with 118 employees. I was the only person who was not in management. In my early 20s, it was great at first, but then it became a nightmare. Bob would call you an unpleasant name to your face. Karen behaved in a very inappropriate manner. Story 38. Yes. It was difficult, not because they were women, but because most of the management had the emotional maturity of 14-year-old mean girls. Story 39. Honestly, yes. I was the only man among 9 in the boardroom and the only man among 14 in my part of the office. Let's just say that if genders were reversed, it would have been a showcase in human resources failures. For example, the marketing team dressed me up as a butler to film me serving women, as the target audience was women. I was the director of production and research and development. I handled critical company intellectual property. It was incredible. Story 40. Sad to say, in my experience, workplaces dominated by women have been far more toxic. Story 41. It was a miserable 5 years being the only man in a department with 8 women. My manager would stand over me when she felt the need to discipline me. I preferred to stand up and speak with her, but she was intimidated by my height. I was sexually harassed by my manager. She couldn't discipline me without wanting to hug me afterward. When I shared this with the department head, she always made excuses for her friend, the manager. Human resources viewed it differently. The retaliation was difficult, but I stuck it out for my pension and got the last laugh when I resigned. When I resigned my position, I found out my coworkers had a pool about how long I would last. I outlasted all predictions. Apparently, another man hired only lasted 10 months prior to my hire. Story 42. Obligatory. I was not the only male. I learned that women can be very mean to each other, much more than women are to men, men are to women, or men are to men. Story 43. Depends on the time. I was the only man in the company while working a mid-shift where I bridged the gap between the 2 main shifts. The night shift was cool. Just relaxed women who loved to joke around and talk playfully to each other in the best sibling-like ways. The morning shift was the worst group of backstabbers and gossip hounds I have ever seen. They completely hated each other, but each believed they were part of a group that secretly disliked someone else. Every time one walked out of the room, all of them would talk negatively about that person, without realizing that the same thing happened with everyone else when they left. Story 44. 12 years in banking made me a much better manager because working with 60% women teaches skills you never obtain in male-dominated roles. Story 45. I'm in healthcare and 90% of my coworkers are women. I clock in, do my job, clock out, and leave work at work. Story 46. In my department, there were 7 women and me all doing the same job. I got a lot of teasing from them, but it was all very good-natured. I am not a sports fan at all. I prefer cats to dogs, and I do what I am told is more stereotypical women's chores than most men. So when anyone referred to our group, it was always as the girls. I never had a problem with any of it. My wife had met all of them at various work parties and became personal with some of them, separate from my relationships with them. One particularly funny story, we were all talking about body shapes one day, and I mentioned how my wife always teases me for not having a well-shaped butt. It isn't ugly, just non-existent. My wife would say, "He doesn't have an ass, his lower back just has a crack in it." The girls thought that was hysterical. I went to work one year on my birthday, and two of them handed me a present. A padded but enhancer that you wear on top of your underwear to give you a better shape, basically a push-up bra for your butt. I went into the men's room to try it on. It actually looked really good. I took a picture of myself in the mirror, sticking my butt out a little and making a coy face. This was in the days before group texts, so I sent it to each one of them individually with the caption, "I think it looks amazing, don't you?" It turned out one of them was not aware of my gift because she had been off the week before and was as confused as I was embarrassed by the whole scenario. Thankfully, I am the type of guy who knows how to be professional while working with women, so her first thought was that there was some kind of mishap and she didn't go to human resources or a manager, which, given her situation, I couldn't blame her. Story 47. Watch out for the difficult colleagues. Whoever is in charge of your department is probably one of them. You basically cannot ask questions that they could perceive as making them look bad because you are an outsider and they will punish you for it. Story 48. I work in a field where the office makeup shifts every 6 months. I have worked with all-male teams, all-female teams, and most typically mixed teams. It is wild how quickly single-gendered offices fall into the worst stereotypes. For men, the culture is very bro-like, aggressive, and overly assertive. For women, it is often catty, hostile, and backstabbing. I find that most of the negative behavior among women is directed at other women, so I can usually manage okay. Female colleagues have told me that, contrary to what you might think, women are often harder on other women in the workplace and usually softer on men. The male-centric environment is more difficult to handle. Personally, I prefer a mix. It is similar to how a mutt is the best kind of dog because the mix of breeds reduces negative traits. It does not work exactly that way in real life, but it creates a better environment. Story 49. I work mostly with women. This past year, I was called into my boss's office because one woman reported me for being rude after I asked her to send me an email instead of having a conversation about what she wanted to discuss. A week later, I was called in again because her office ally reported me for being rude during a meeting that my boss attended. The first woman is the office bully and a complete narcissist. I believe she ended up in more trouble than I did and has been excessively nice to me since. The other woman was exposed for gaslighting me when I presented an old email proving her claim about me was untrue. She is quitting this week. Overall, it is great and most people are friendly, but if you find yourself outside the clique, they will do everything they can to get rid of you. Thankfully, I have a great boss who is also a woman. Story 50. I was there for one summer in college. It was actually pretty cool. We all got along well. There wasn't any drama. They kind of looked out for me. In fact, I casually mentioned getting back with an ex they knew who was working in another office, and my boss said she would kill me if I did, which brought me to my senses. Story 51. Yes. I was expected to do all heavy lifting, such as putting the new bottled water on top of the water cooler. Also, I was told I shake my hips when I walk. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Story 52. I was on a female-dominated and led team for a while and was often the only male present at meetings. I loved how the women joked around and cared personally for each other. Story 53. I was the only man in my department for a few years. It was challenging in a less than ideal way. Individually, the women I worked with were fine. Just standard, normal human interactions. When there were more than two of them together, it was an absolute chaos. I also learned much more about their personal lives and the personal lives of their friends than I ever wanted to know. Story 54. On my first day at work, I went to use the men's restroom and found a female coworker putting on makeup. Later that day, I went to the men's restroom again and forgot to lock the door. A female coworker came in as if I wasn't there and went to wash her hands. She jumped and quickly left, apologizing repeatedly and saying they were not used to having a man there. Story 55. I once worked at Dunkin' because there was an all-female crew that was very attractive. The vibe was great, but the work was difficult, so I quit after 2 weeks. Story 56. I was sexually harassed. I was hired supposedly to organize licenses and handle fee collection, but in reality, it was so they had someone to carry heavy items. My boss also had me escort her to events when her husband did not want to attend. She never acted inappropriately, but it was still strange that a woman in her 40s had a 21-year-old man take her to these events. Story 57. For the last 10 years of my working life, this has been me, 95% women. This definitely cliquey, and there is a strange dynamic between the young and older women. The young ones feel like they have something to prove and steamroll anyone in their way. The older ones were often motherly. Those in positions of power seemed to double down on the nastiness as if they had to be tough to hold that position among men. Everything often needed to be done in a particular way and was very precise. A few threw down emotional torture like only women can. I had healthy relationships with the women my age. Every office is different, of course. With some, the relationship was almost brotherly or sisterly, and with others, I kept it fairly professional. I'm young and married. There was never any nonsense that went on. I definitely kept my guard up to avoid stepping over anyone's personal boundaries. I changed jobs this year and now work with a mostly male team. I feel like I can be more myself, say what I'm thinking, and there is a lot less emotional baggage. The office is still mostly professional, but it's great having some good banter, talking about football, and calling it a day to go have a beer. Another thing I will say is that when you have a group of young women who all start getting pregnant, it can make work difficult. Everything from hormones and morning sickness in the office to maternity leave for 6 months and babies coming into the office. Fun times. Story 58. I worked in a high-street fashion store called Hobbs. I was hired as a stockroom assistant and was there for 4 years before being made redundant. At first, I was intimidated by my boss, who was an ex-dance agent, provocateur, and model. But after the initial new job shock, she sort of forgot about me, just rattling around in the basement and the shoe stockroom. I used to come in early to iron my shirts and trousers and polish my boots, making an effort as per the contract. I was given a generous uniform allowance, so I had new boots and shirts every 6 months. I had to be careful about how I spoke with the girls, as most of them were teenagers and still babies. I made a few cry after they disrespected the shoe stockroom over the weekend. A lot of the girls didn't last long because they didn't take to the culture of upselling and knowing the product. Working in the stockroom, I knew every piece back to front, the fabric, the cut, and how it should be worn. I ended up being sent to other stores that had no stockroom controller to tidy up and straighten out their back rooms, as no one had done it in years. Story 59. Close to it, but the management was almost entirely women, including several senior directors. I had female managers for around 25 years and did not realize how stifling it was until I had a male manager for the last 5 years of my career. I did not realize how much of a performance I had to put on every day just to communicate with the managers. There was so much drama, emotion, and background noise versus focusing on business, issues, and humor. When I got the male manager, it was like a whole new environment. It was amazing and wonderful. Story 60. I'm a social worker. I have worked in a few female-dominated offices. Being a man can be a little isolating in these settings. Women tend to communicate emotions and chat more, though the older I get, the less I want to be chummy and chatty at work. I also find that women sometimes don't interpret male directness well. I say what's on my mind, which may be feedback or an analysis of something, but in some offices, women are used to being polite and rarely share perspectives publicly. People appreciated my directness until they didn't. Story 61. I did information technology work for an insurance firm. There were 30 employees, and I was the only male aside from the chief executive officer who was in his 60s. I did not notice a difference. I just did my job and went home. Story 62. I was the only male on my team at a custom fashion company back in college. Overall, my experience was okay. Not terrible, but also not great. This was a much-needed promotion from the warehouse work I was typically doing while in school. However, it still wasn't my passion. Everyone there went to school for fashion, lived, breathed, and adored fashion. I was just working there to afford my bills and have a schedule that would work better with my schooling. I think that was a big disconnect for me. I also wasn't very social because I was the youngest by maybe 7 to 10 years on average. I didn't have a family, significant other, or shared hobbies, so that put me as an outlier. Because I was so tired, typically pulling 80 hours a week between work and school for a year, I was zoned in. They invited me to one team outing when someone moved to a new house, but I was very awkward. After that, I think they naturally phased me out of post-work activities. However, I've never felt more taken care of on a team where I didn't fit in. They all gave me cards on my birthday, made sure I was included in lunch orders, and helped me improve my skills when I needed it. I was also starving, often eating raw ramen secretly for lunch. I'm not sure if it was one person, the team, or an act of God, but I found $300 worth of grocery gift cards on my desk. My only complaint was that they never meant what they said. It was always subtext, which is hard to pick up on when you're hungry and exhausted. I still occasionally run into my old boss whenever I visit my home city randomly. He has since left the industry but is still thriving. Story 63. I worked in a restaurant where I was one of only 2 straight males in the kitchen. We were almost always on different shifts. I have spent many nights and weekends working overtime at various engineering firms, alone in the office. Story 64. Not an office, but a factory. One of the first jobs I had was in a factory that made circuit boards for computers in 1984. I fixed problems on the equipment they used to test the boards after they were made. The floor I worked on was huge. There were at least 300 assemblers on the floor, 95% of them women of all ages. I was 21 years old, fresh out of the United States Air Force, still pretty much a country hick. I blushed easily those days. Once a few of the women found that out, the whole floor knew soon after. It seemed like everyone took delight in making me blush. The things they would say started out pretty mild. It did not take much early on to get the reaction. As time went on, it took more to get the blush. Things gradually escalated over time. Toward the end, I was getting flashed on a regular basis, all sorts of accidental brushes, rubs, and so on. It was not that I was some sort of great-looking guy. It was about getting the blush for them. I did get more than a few dates out of that job. Yes, I know it was sexual harassment. It was a different time, and honestly, it is a fond memory of my past. Story 65. I'm loving these posts. As a man who manages several women, I need all the help I can get. One woman on my team became aggressive and then teary when an executive challenged her project cost forecast. She is 42, and I find my 4-year-old son has better emotional regulation. Story 66. I think it is difficult in the same way that being the only woman in the office would be difficult. You get left out of some conversations and people go out for coffee without you because they assume you will not want to come. It can be hard to deal with office politics as women tend to be more socially aware than men, especially when dealing with other women. The false friendliness can be quite grating. It is not nice being the only one of anything. Story 67. Currently, I am the only man on a team of 15. There are about 125 employees in my division, and only 15 are men. There is definitely a girls' club mentality. It is a big club and I am not in it. Story 68. I was the only male on an all-female team for 2 years and was also the youngest by 15 years. My coworkers were smart, hardworking, and fun. I only left because I got an opportunity one could not refuse. Story 69. I was in trades and always worked with men. I had to find someone who worked in offices with women. I said it must be nice working in an office because they come in all dressed up looking nice. The men said it sucks. They fight about dumb little things and rat on each other. One guy said he had to put up partitions between their desks to keep them from fighting. Story 70. I used to work with many women in social services. They were very caring. I did experience some sexual harassment occasionally. Other than that, it was a positive experience. Now I am in technology, where there are more men than women, but we all work well together. Story 71. I work in a nursing college and am the only male in my team. I try to keep to myself and not draw too much attention. I am one of the first people to be called upon when something heavy needs to be moved. Story 72. I have been alone in the office, kitchen, or cafeteria more than a few times. Sometimes the cleaning staff worked at a distance, but I prefer doing my service calls alone. Ghosts do not bother me. Some are just curious. Story 73. I was the only male at an after-hours medical call center once. It was pretty normal other than the occasional comment about me being a man. The only reason I left was because management tried to manipulate people about their performances. It was a great group of women for sure. Story 74. It was fine. I got on well enough with everyone. Several of them were very attractive, but I was married at the time, so I brushed it off. On my last day, when we took a group photo with the whole small office, about 8 people, one of the girls said, "Wait, let me fix my bra so it looks nice." I replied, "I'm surprised you're wearing a bra today at all." She wasn't busty, just had noticeable hard nipples. We all had a good laugh. Story 75. I recently quit a warehouse job. My department consisted of 14 women, 2 men, and me. It was honestly terrible. They were cliquey, miserable people. The turnover rate was insane. I saw 10 people come and go before I left in just 6 short months. Never again. Story 76. Yes, I have worked in healthcare my entire adult life. It is honestly exhausting. I have worked with calm women for sure, but many times there is unnecessary drama, pettiness, and vindictive behavior. There is too much talking about the problem rather than fixing the problem. Story 77. It is really eye-opening. They take away a lot of what their husbands do for you. Your opinion becomes less valid. It is surprising. Story 78. I had a career in hotel management, then switched to human resources. In recent years, I got tired of human resources and have been moving into health and safety. I have been the only man in the office surrounded by women for about 2/3 of my life. I have also spent several years working in a male-dominated primary industry field. I have noticed much of what you have observed. It is making me better, both professionally and personally. If you move back into a male-dominated field, it may work against you. Being in a female-dominated office has its ups and downs, like any other situation. I experienced misandry from a new manager who had me fired within 4 months despite having been in the role for 5 years with nothing but praise. The office politics are more subtle, complicated, and convoluted, and less direct than dealing with men. Women can be quietly unprofessional to one another in a professional setting. With men, you are more likely to see it coming, but with women, you can be blindsided. On the other hand, the community is nice as long as you are part of the group. Women are more careful interacting with you one-on-one, and you can be isolated in some situations. You are a man, after all, and sometimes women have to avoid rumors of romantic complications or perceptions of safety that may not even occur to you. They are also more inclined to be friendly at work, but not as friendly socially outside of work for similar reasons or when they simply do not like you. Men are more likely to be cold to you regardless of the environment if they do not like you. You will likely find that you also talk more and about topics that are not directly job-related, which is not necessarily a benefit if you switch back to a male-dominated industry. Story 79. I worked in a state farm office with just me and 3 women, ages 40 to 55, for a year after college, and it was brutal. The 3 of them, one of whom was the boss, would talk like they were 15 years old, calling chocolate chalky. One 40-year-old lady would say, "I left a packet on your desk," meaning a small stack of paper stapled together. The phrase that stuck with me forever was them saying they were getting hungry and angry every single day 20 minutes before lunch. Story 80. Healthcare varies by location. One thing was certain. If you were male, more was expected in regards to lifting or taking more dangerous assignments. If you came in with a sore back or were not at your best, you would not receive much accommodation. If you pushed back, you could expect a lot of pressure. That being said, with some crews it was better, and they treated you more fairly. The mean crew was really just blunt and old school. They were my preferred group as they worked hard and were very fair. They tolerated no slackers and were ready to confront anybody who wanted to challenge, including the doctor. My personal experience was that there are many cliques that become a larger issue when women control the workplace. Story 81. Yes, at a veterinary clinic when I was in college. I was hit on and pressured by coworkers to hook up with another summer helper, who was also a college student and looking for a summer fling. I was not interested, and it made me uncomfortable. Story 82. Not an office, but I used to work in a store with a group of women. There were typically 3 to 4 women and me on shift. They were mostly older women and one younger one. I didn't really notice much difference from when I worked with men though. We did stand around gossiping a lot more, which I enjoyed. They were very open about sexuality, not afraid to talk about everything. Every week when new adult magazines arrived, we would browse through them together between customers. It was genuinely some of the most fun I've had at a job. Story 83. As an accountant, I was the only male non-boss person in the office for a while. I didn't mind it because my work allowed me to bring my puppy, and everyone cared more about interacting with him than me. Story 84. I am the only man in an office with 4 other women. We get along well. I have not changed my behavior or style, but I receive compliments from time to time, which was uncommon before. The gossiping and lack of work, combined with excessive talking, really surprised me and sometimes upset me. Story 85. For 13 years, I worked in a sewing factory with over 1,000 women. It was always interesting. This was in a small rural town where after high school, you either go off to college and never come back or you get married and work in one of the factories. This was 40 years ago when there were still factories everywhere. Most of these women had chosen the latter. Most were married and had children, including many single mothers. Occasionally, I would get frustrated and make some of them angry with me, but most of the time, I tried to get along since I was heavily outnumbered. There were maybe 12 men in the entire shop, including management, maintenance, and a few of us on the floor. Several of them regularly told me that I was just one of the girls. Many shared stories of men they were or had been married to. 2 women told me the same story. When they were pregnant, they were put on complete bed rest and hired a young woman to help around the house because their husbands would not assist their wives. Both husbands had affairs with the helper, and both wives remained married to them because they knew how difficult being a single mother would have been. One older woman had been married to a man who was extremely abusive, so she shot him 6 times with a handgun. At that time, the police interviewed her and all the neighbors, who confirmed how terrible he had been to her. She never had to go to jail, not even during the investigation. Mostly, I learned that many of these women had been through difficult experiences in their lives, some of which were their fault and some not. I was given a glimpse into how women have to be careful and on guard all the time, and how often they feel threatened. Working there gave me a new understanding and appreciation for what many women have to endure. I decided I was going to be the good guy, and I have tried very hard to keep that up. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.